So how does that translate into culture? I think there are a number of things. And at the heart of culture is the sense of transmission of ideas, of values, of um, of effort, and that's built on building up trust. Let me talk a bit about storytelling, because to me, storytelling is really at the heart of what startups have to do. They don't have clout in the marketplace. They don't have existing customer bases. They cannot succeed in the marketplace because they have more market power. They succeed because they get people to believe that the world that they are building is highly attractive and quite plausible. And so that they get people, the employees, the investors, the customers, their partners rooting for them, wanting them to be successful because they are part of making a attractive dream come true. But when you're storytelling, you have a range of different styles, particularly when you're building something that's hard to do. It's not all going to be perfect and realized in the first moment. You will envision something and it will take you months or years to make it come true. And even when you're making it come true, the first version of what you make come true isn't the whole vision. And you've got a range of choices, particularly when talking about technology and talking about the future, as to how much you lean forward, how much you anticipate what's going to be true, how much do you muddle together what could be true, what will be true, and what is true today, whether it's how many customers you have or how well your technology operates. And so at one extreme, there are companies, and we talked last time about some of the extremes like Theranos that tell the audience everything they want to hear. At the other extreme, you have a very strict model, and big companies who are dominant in their industry often are held to a standard which is pretty extreme, of telling their audience only what is scientifically proven. And I think you need to be more on the side of what is solid, supportable fact. But you get a little bit of license in projecting what the future likely holds. This is what we are building. This is what it should look like when we're done. Where you really get into trouble, I think, is when you talk about things in the present tense, or worse yet, you talk about things in the past tense when they really are in the future. And you need to establish a level of confidence that you have in order to talk about things. You have to decide. And different companies are at different levels along this. There's not a huge range of what's acceptable in terms of how much leaning forward to do, but there is some. I think that long-term credibility requires quite a bit of candor, certainly internally, absolutely internally, and a certain amount, fairly high degree of candor with customers on the feasibility and the status. Yes, the glass can be, you can describe the glass as half full, but you shouldn't take a half empty glass and describe it as overflowing. I think it's also to develop language that allows you to easily distinguish what is real, what is here, what can you actually ship versus what can you actually demonstrate versus what do you have a solid plan to ship or demonstrate in the next 90 days versus what is possible given the nature of the technology. I think it is often accompanied by vision about the likely implications of it. Even if you're not building something, you can describe something about the world that will evolve if such a technology exists. And that's like saying the glass is huge, saying the potential, what we could fill up one day, what we ourselves as this company will fill up, or what the industry will fill up as a result of our technology being available, of our product being in people's hands. That vision is a very important part of storytelling. And you have to figure out the best ways to tell the story that resonates with what people want or need and is solidly grounded in what you can actually do. Different audiences have different needs. They're all built on this notion of people want a good chance of success. The team is particularly motivated by juicy challenges. They want technically hard problems, so long as solving those problems is relevant to success and it's not a wild shot in the dark. It's something that if they work hard, they will be a part of making it successful. Investors want to see a huge market with big defensible barriers and a good chance of success. And customers, of course, lean into, does it help them? Is it a great fit to their problem? But they also want their supplier to have a good chance of success. Customers want you to win because it's good for them. It's much better for them if you're successful than if you fail. Because if you're going to fail, it doesn't really matter how well you fit their problem. You're going to not be able to supply it over the long run. So everybody wants to hear about a good chance of success, but then they have a different piece of it that they really specifically need because of their much more selfish interests. Excuse me. Okay, so now you've hired a great team. You've figured out how to tell a story. How do you get this team to really perform what's needed? There is a sense of team building. This is about 1% formal team building exercises and 99% what you do in working with these people. And what is that 99%? It's establishing communication that is trustful and respectful. It's establishing what different people's roles are so they know more precisely what is expected of them and is something that either they're good at or something that they are prepared to get good at. That you establish how you're going to communicate. You're going to establish what decisions they are responsible for and what decisions they're contributing to and what decisions they need to understand are being made by others and that they are prepared to buy into that decision making. That there are norms for conflict resolution. Now, conflict resolution does not mean, two people having a fight in the hallway. Conflict resolution more often means, I think it's going to take me 2 weeks to do this, and you think it has to be delivered to the customer in 10 days. How are we going to resolve the tension between those two dates? Often it means negotiation, figuring out what's really true. How do you get more help? How do you adjust where the goal line is? Those are all elements of conflict resolution. And each person and each small team develops some local norms of behavior, some local style of doing things. And everybody works in an environment where they are thinking about what are their standards for work, what are the standards of work in that small team, the people they work with intimately for hours every day, what's happening in their group in engineering or in sales, and what's happening at a company level. And there is a mixture of these different norms that everyone puts together. Now, hopefully they're all fairly compatible, that they're not going in opposite directions, but it is something where you can't imagine that everybody in the company is going to operate in exactly the same environment. Challenges are good. Challenges that show everybody on the team that you can overcome problems by working together is very powerful feedback, can be a very powerful confidence builder. So sometimes problems are good. We talked about that in the crises and pitfalls. They can bring people together. So big problems are often very beneficial. I told the story of the early days of NVIDIA when they had really big problems, existential problems. Were they going to survive? They at one point got down to a point where they had about 30 days of cash left. It was not clear that they were going to be able to pay salaries for the next month. So the people who came through that come to believe in their own capabilities, in their leaders' capabilities, and it can be a very powerful thing. In part because you can look back at other problems as they come along and say, oh, that's not as bad as this other problem we successfully overcame. I'm a big believer in the power of diversity. And by diversity, I mean having a set of people who bring different skills and angles to the problem, that you get more ideas about how to solve a different problem. You may have one person who says, of course, oh, well, I can solve that in hardware. And another person says, I can solve that in software. Another person who says, well, I can adjust the product specification so that this is actually a feature, not a bug. I can work with the customer and make this really okay. And you need people who see it from different angles so that you have a full palette of tools. But you also need different kinds of resilience in the organization. In different situations, you want different people who can step up and say, I got this. I know what to do here. Trust me. This is okay. We're going to do X, Y, and Z, and that's going to make this problem survivable. And people with different life experiences, people with different educational backgrounds, even people who come from different cultures often have resilience in areas that turn out to be really important. And that is something that I've consistently seen. And it's reflected in the idea that very often a group is smarter than the smartest person in the group. I'm a reasonably smart person, but I have seen so many times when a better idea coming from a different perspective was way better than the smartest thing that I could come up with on my own. We all have traps, ruts, blinders, and team diversity is the way that you take the blinders off of the team as a whole, even if every individual has significant shortcomings. I think it's also worth noting that norms are likely to evolve over time. That as you get bigger, as you get more people, as you get scale, you get more specialists, or you get people spending more time in their specialty. But there are foundational principles that must endure. And I think that the most fundamental ones are honesty with yourself, honesty with other people, transparency. Don't hide information. Share as much as you can with other people so that they can help make decisions. A commitment to hard work and respect for one another, respect for the capabilities and the efforts of others. If you have those things in an organization, you're pretty likely to do some pretty incredible work together. Let's talk a little bit about remote work. This is something I struggle with. And certainly in the last 5 years at Cisco, going through the pandemic, it has tested this in many ways. And certainly when you get into a big organization that has teams all over the world and people are in all different time zones, a lot of the collaboration which takes place takes place over time and distance. You are remote from that person, whether you are remote while sitting in your office or remote while sitting at home, you're remote. And so that will, in some cases, dominate the question of what is the nature of remote work. The question of are you working from the office versus working from home is actually kind of secondary once you get to that kind of global situation. But when you think about the special needs of a startup, you have a fundamental need for rapid decision making amid huge uncertainty. And a small team of people is trying to grapple with an enormous range of different kinds of issues. Yes, you have classic technical issues and engineering process decisions, but also product strategy decisions and what color is our logo going to be? And how am I going to work with customer one and customer two and customer three? And so that diversity of challenges means that you need to find a mechanism with very wide open communication and trust. Trust is built on having established a pattern and continuing a pattern of effortless communication and a visceral understanding of everybody's strengths and weaknesses and current state of mind. And so I have a sniff test. I have a sort of a model in my mind about what that means. I think that the founding team needs to spend physical time together to establish that trust foundation. You have to meet with your co-founders in environments where it's not just about meeting the agenda of that particular meeting, where you get to know them, you get to understand their strengths and weaknesses, you get to understand how they express themselves, you get to understand what is going on in their life more completely. I think it's good to meet their families. It's good to understand what they do in their spare time. It's good to understand their history. What are the challenges they've had in the past? And it's much easier to do that if you have physical time together. And so I've kind of arbitrarily said, I think you need to spend 1,000 hours together. You may ultimately be planning to be in different places, particularly if you've got as happens a good bit, you have a core business team, a strategy team, which is based in Silicon Valley, and you have an engineering team, which is based someplace else. Someplace where typically there's a big tool of cost-effective engineering, and you establish sort of these two sites. Or it could be just because the leaders have reasons why one needs to be in New York and one needs to be in Los Angeles, and you plan to operate that way. But you got to find a way to spend time together to get that much more broad and solid foundation of knowledge of one another to do that. The biggest source of inefficiency is not from distance. It's not from the fact that, I live in Santa Cruz and you live in Mountain View and we don't get together every day. I think the biggest source of inefficiency is time zone. If you're 9 hours or 12 hours off from me, I can't count on just picking up the phone or getting an instant response to a text or a message or an email. I really have to wait a day to hear back from you. And with the number of decisions that you need to make in a startup, you cannot afford to add a day to very many decisions. And so as you think about expanding into multiple time zones, you have to think about making quasi-independent teams where significant decision-making authority is delegated to those regional teams. I think that's very tricky for startups. As a startup grows, I think it gets easier and easier. And certainly at Tensilica and even at Babel Labs, we did pretty well with having people in multiple time zones. Most strikingly in Tensilica, we had an India design center in Pune. Um, and in Babel Labs, we had a significant contingent of people in Europe, particularly Central Europe. And we managed to make that work, though it did require this functional partitioning of the team so that there was a degree of autonomy. And in both cases, the leadership teams were all in the Bay Area and and working physically together until the final days of Babel Labs when everybody had to go home. So Samer has contributed a lot of thoughts here on taking care of the team and taking care of this, taking care of yourself. It's a stressful task. Stress is kind of the baseline. Does it involve 70-hour a week kind of work? Yeah, sometimes it does. For some people, that's where they're comfortable. To be honest, I haven't worked 70 hours a week since the early days of MIPS, though I probably worried about the business, was thinking about the business 90 hours a week. But physically sitting in front of a computer or physically in meetings, I was consistently more of a 50 to sometimes 60-hour a week guy. So I don't want to suggest if you're not working 80 hours a week, you can't do a startup. But there are pressures there because you're not only expecting to get a lot done, you're expecting to get a lot done when things are ambiguous, when you're facing very personal pressure. You got to figure out your personal operating system basics. How are you going to get sleep? How are you going to get exercise? How are you going to get fed? How are you going to get the emotional support that you need from your family, from your peer group? Some people really get significant help from coaches, therapists, mentors, other people that they can take issues to where there's not negative consequences for sharing your doubts, fears. There are institutional resources. These tend to come with a much wider variety of healthcare plans, employee assistance plans, healthcare benefits. Sometimes the team can take care of itself with team retreats and things that may be counting as team building, but it's also team relaxation. It's some off time when you're not staring at the screen. You need to have in mind for your company, for yourself, a crisis playbook. When things get bad, what are you going to do? How are you going to know that things are bad? How are you going to delegate to other people? If you need to take a day or a week off because of a health problem or an emotional crisis, how are you going to do that? Figure that out. Think a little bit about it beforehand. Think about boundaries. What are you going to do to not only help yourself, but help the whole team have some diversity in the pressures, diversity in the timing? Can you block out times when we're just not going to have meetings and people can breathe a little easier? Find ways to share this burden. I mean, the worst thing in my mind is everybody feels exactly the same way. They're feeling intense pressure, but they're not telling anybody about it. So you have all of these isolated people suffering individually when just knowing that other people are suffering or under stress or really feeling the effects without talking about it, without being able to vent a little bit is I think dangerous. So normalizing vulnerability and keep track. of things? Are people leaving the company because they're burned out? Are people getting emotional over small things that they didn't used to do? Can you kind of keep a finger on the pulse of not only your own emotional state, your own burnout state, but how are other people doing in the company? And uh, as leaders, sometimes you need to up the pressure. Though I find in startups, people apply far more pressure to themselves than management ever would choose to do. And so you often don't need to pressure people, but sometimes you need to make sure that people are backing off, that you overtly release the pressure so that people know it's okay, that people are human, that burnout is something that we care about. Let's talk about how information is communicated and what uh, that means for the productivity as a company as a whole. For me, one of the best um, ways of thinking about this is in the communication needed for making decisions. Now, of course, the progress of a company can be tied very closely to the pace of making good decisions. You decide that you're going to implement feature X, not feature Y. You decide that you are going to go to this trade show or not. You make a decision that you are going to do this special version for customer number one or not. You decide that you will outsource that activity to a contractor. Those are key decisions that you will make. How you make those decisions depends on gathering together in one place enough of the information so that an informed decision can be made. And so, in kind of computer architecture terms, the rate of doing some activity, like decision making, is tied to, in part, can you do it in parallel? And this means empowering more people to make decisions. And empowerment is not just authority. You can't just go to somebody and say, you now have the authority to make this decision. But you also have to arm them with the information and the insights and the perspectives so that they are capable of making a good decision. And that means that the backdrop for any decision making, whether it's made at a high level in the organization or low, is having everyone as fully equipped as possible about what's the context, what's the background for making that decision. And it means that it does make sense to share a lot of technical information with the business teams and to share a lot of the business situation with the technical teams, because there is very rarely in a tech startup a solely business decision or a solely technical decision. They're always a mix. And so I like to think about this with the term information flow on a need not to know basis. What I mean is that information is not shared only if there's a specific reason not to share it. Specific reasons might be that's customer proprietary information, or the cost of a leak is so high that it would be an existential threat to the company if this information were to get out. And while you need to trust people, giving people information that they don't know is so highly sensitive is a bit problematic. Now, I would take as a classic example the information that the company is about to be acquired, something that it probably makes sense to keep with a smaller team because the damage that is done is so high. And if somebody doesn't understand how sensitive that information is, it can be deadly. But handling customer information is typically the the most important case. So you have to build up trust. You have to make everyone sensitive to the importance of sensitive information. And it helps in multiple ways. It helps moderate their response to scary information. By making people sensitive, it helps ensure that you aren't releasing that information. And it's something which is a unique advantage that private companies have. When you get into a public company, there is a presumption, which unfortunately is grounded in experience, which says if you publish something widely in your employee population, it's going to get out. There is a presumption that if you talk about financial information for the current fiscal quarter, that information is going to get out, and that represents inappropriate leakage of financial information that the regulatory authorities really frown on. And so you can't do that. And so inside of public companies, you have very strict need to know rules that limit the flow of information, the kind of information that you really want people to have in a small organization, and which helps their individual decision making because they understand the larger context in which decisions are being made and in which they are making decisions. So, closing thoughts. Company culture is an implicit set of behaviors. When it's done right, it gives everybody on the team a model of how to behave, even when the rules are not explicitly laid out. Company culture is not something that exists in an employee handbook, in the unlikely event that your startup has an employee handbook. But it does guide people on what is okay and what is not okay, what is encouraged and what is merely tolerated. What are the ways that we agree we're going to work together because it gives us a common vocabulary and common motivations? I think it's also important to recognize that it takes time. At any given moment in a company, in a startup, you often feel like you're in a sprint. I've got to push as hard as physically possible because in 6 weeks, we need to deliver this to our customer. Or I need to stay up all night because the customer is waiting for this thing, this presentation, this analysis, this quote, whatever it is. And you are in sprint mode some of the time. But it's important, even while you're sprinting, to recognize that this sprint is going to be followed by another and another and another. And that's a marathon. I used to run road marathons. I did that for about 10 years and loved it. I then switched to trail ultra marathons. And this is a picture of me halfway through a trail ultra marathon I did last April. And so the connection between marathons and building companies is very near and dear to my heart. But it absolutely is the case. Babel Labs was amazingly quick exit, 3 years from founding until acquisition and integration into Cisco. But the norm is typically significantly longer than that. And you're going to need to keep getting stronger as the race goes on. And that means pacing. And finally, and this is something which I feel so strongly from the bottom of my heart, is that building a company and building a team are among the most satisfying activities that you will have in your career. That when it works, it is a an experience that informs much of how you view your whole professional life and bleeds over even into your personal life. And it's partly because overcoming challenges like that is enormously satisfying. But more importantly, working with a team of people on building something together and building something that has lasting impact on the team and lasting impact on the world outside is a kind of satisfaction you cannot get any other way that I know of. So go build companies, go build great companies, go build companies that really are changing the world. Go build companies that do something important technically that affect a lot of people in a positive way. You do that, and you will have such an experience that I envy you. Many of you are early or midway in your careers, and you have great things ahead of you.